Okay, chapter 27. Pardon me, still got the flu. It's called Death in the Dust. I highly suggest having a tissue ready for this chapter, as that it is very emotional. It's very, very sad. It is a pivotal moment in the novel, and it is a pivotal moment in showing us sort of the very, very deep-seated cruelty of Mr. Percival Derby, slave owners in America. This is the 1700s, if you remember. It's very representative of a lot of the slave owners in America, and it's quite sickening, but we retell history, so hopefully it will not be repeated. All right, chapter 27, Death in the Dust. Amari was waiting for Polly in the kitchen. "Is the baby safe?" Polly asked her. Amari nodded and then asked, "Well, what did Massa say?" Polly looked at her and said, "It's very bad. Mr. Derby wants the doctor to see the body of the child." "Oh, what we do?" Amari asked, turning to Teeny for advice. "Well, we must stop the wagon with Noah and the doctor before it gets here," Polly declared. "Remember, there's no cell phones or anything like that, so the girls are just going to have to go out on the road or whatever and hopefully try to find Noah, try to stall him somehow, which is probably not going to go over well because there's going to be a doctor in the wagon that says, no, 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 I need to get there." "Ain't no we about it," Teeny replied as she shucked the basket of corn. "You a white gal. You the only one that allowed to be on the road after dark." So that's something that we're going to want to remember for later in the text. And making a little connection here, if you remember when we were reading Night back before Christmas break, when the Nazis first invaded Ellie's hometown, the Jewish people could not be outside of their homes after 6. So it's very similar thing here. After dark, after 6, it's a curfew. I mean, this is just a further way to control. Polly took a deep breath. "All right, I'll go. Tell me what to do." "Whatever it take to turn that wagon around," Teeny said without conviction. "Ain't gonna be easy." Dusk had fallen. Polly had left the kitchen and headed down the main road, the road that had brought her to this place with Amari. So much has changed since then, she thought. She half walked, half jogged about a mile, and the darkness was so thick it seemed to smother her. And then she heard a wagon approaching. As it got close to her, she ran toward it, and it startled the horses. "Please, sir," Polly began, "are you Dr. Hoskins?" She did not look at Noah, although she had a feeling he knew exactly what was going on. "Well, yes, I am. Is Mrs. Derby all right?" "Oh, yes, sir. She's just fine. And the baby, too. Crying and nursing and being sweet like newborns always are." Polly knew she was babbling, but she couldn't find the words to make him turn around. "That's why I came out here to meet you, sir, to tell you that the baby's been born with no complications. Mrs. Derby is fit and fine, and your services are no longer needed. Mr. Derby wanted to save you an unnecessary house call." She spoke very quickly, glad that it was dark, so he couldn't see how scared she was. Noah seemed to understand immediately that it was not a good idea for the doctor to make it to the plantation, for he spoke up to say, "Well, I'll be glad to drive you back to Charlestown, sir. No trouble at all, sir." "Nonsense," the doctor replied gruffly. "No, you will not drive me back. It took us 4 hours to get here. I shall see to my patient and her infant, and I shall eat a fine meal prepared by Derby's servants, and I shall spend the night here and return refreshed to Charlestown in the morning. We shall proceed to Derbyshire Farms." "But, sir," Polly tried weakly. "Who are you, my dear, and why are you out here on the road after dark?" He offered Polly a hand and helped her up to the wagon. "It's not safe, you know. Highwaymen will slit your throat in a heartbeat. Highwaymen are robbers. They kill people to rob their stagecoaches of anything that they can come across. They also actually steal the coach and the horses." Defeated, Polly replied, "Well, my name is Polly Pritchard, and I work for Mr. Derby." "Did he send you out here to send me back?" Dr. Hoskins asked. Polly wasn't sure whether to lie or to tell the truth, so she said nothing in reply. The wagon moved slowly towards the house. Polly prayed silently, fingering the tie strings on her bonnet. Mr. Derby waited near the big circular pillars in the front of the house. He looked grief-stricken. "Thank you for making this long drive, Dr. Hoskins," he said to the doctor as he stiffly stepped down from the wagon. "But I'm afraid your trip was in vain. Isabel is fine, but the baby was stillborn." He choked on the words. Dr. Hoskins looked confused. "Stillborn? This woman here just told me that the baby was fine and healthy. What's going on?" Polly tried to jump down from the wagon, but Mr. Derby grabbed her arm. The anguish on his face turned to anger. "What is going on here? I told you I would never allow any insubordination in my household. You explain what's going on this instant." Polly's heart pounded. She opened her mouth to speak just as she heard Lena's voice behind her, yelling from the upstairs window. "Oh, massa, come quick! Miss Isabel done fainted!" Mr. Derby released Polly and ran with the doctor to the house. Polly collapsed on the ground with relief. "This night's not going to end well," she thought fearfully. Maury ran out of the kitchen as soon as the two men had disappeared. She looked directly at Noah, who was staring toward Mrs. Derby's window with concern. "Baby is black," Amari told him bluntly. "Pretty girl child." Noah groaned and covered his head with his eyes. "Is Isabel all right? The baby is alive?" Polly was surprised by the seeming depth of his anguish. Teeny had come out of the kitchen to join them. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Yeah, they both alive for now, but it won't take long for Massa to figure out what's really happening. We's all in big trouble trying to cover up your mess." Tidbit ran from the kitchen and toward his mother. She yelled at the child fiercely. "You go get in the kindling box and hide there, you hear? And don't come out till I get you." The boy took a long look at her face and hightailed it back to the kitchen. Noah sat down on the ground in the dirt. It seemed to Polly that he was overwhelmed by the evening's events. "We growed up together as children," he explained. "She was the mistress, of course, and I be the slave. But that didn't make us no matter at all. We'd go fishing and running through the woods, just liking each other, you know." Teeny grunted and kept glancing at the window through the upstairs where Lena and Miss Isabel were trying to stall the doctor and Mr. Derby. "What was you thinking?" Teeny asked finally, annoyance and amazement in her voice. "Just 'cause a chicken got wings don't mean it ought to fly. Y'all should have known better." "As she got older," Noah continued, ignoring Teeny, "she turned down every good-looking boy who come to court her. Her daddy finally put a stop to that young girl foolishness and married her off to Massa Derby. She cried for days before the wedding." Noah stopped. His shoulders drooped. "When Massa Derby moved her here, she insisted that I come with her. Her daddy didn't see no harm. So she and me was real happy. When she found out that she was with child, we figured the baby belonged to Massa Derby, or at least that's what we was hoping." Mistress and slave, falling in love. Polly realized with a start. "I didn't think such a thing was even possible." "Has something like this ever happened before?" Polly asked. Noah shook his head. "I don't know, Missy. No one's done lived to tell about it." "You got to run away, Noah," Teeny told him clearly. "Massa's gonna kill you for sure." "I ain't running. I love her," he replied simply. Teeny snorted. "Love don't mean pig spit around here." She had no more time to argue with him. For that moment, Mr. Derby emerged from the front door of the house, angrily holding up a weak and sobbing Mrs. Derby. In his right hand, he held a gun. The doctor noticeably had remained inside. Polly, Teeny, and Amari drew back at the fury on Mr. Derby's face. Noah stood slowly and with dignity. He looked at Isabel Derby with a look of absolute love on his face. He seemed to relax as she gazed at Noah. She smiled at him and then reached out to him with her free hand. Her husband slapped her arm down. "Isabel!" he barked, his voice tight with fury. Coming from the opposite direction from the slave quarters, a sharp, wailing cry of a newborn could be heard. As they all turned in that direction, they could see Clay Derby. strolling towards them, carrying the baby girl. The infant had been stripped of her blanket, and she protested loudly in the chill of the night air. Polly was having difficulty finding each new breath. She had to force herself not to reach out and grab the baby from Clay. "Looking for something, Father?" he asked with a grin. "I found this baby down at Sarah Jane's place. She swears it's her baby, but it looks to be newborn, and her little pickaninny must be about 3 months old. It seems a bit impossible, don't you think?" Polly could tell that Clay was actually enjoying this. She and Amari watched, horrified, as Clay laid the naked, screaming baby on the dirt in front of his father. Polly grabbed Amari's hand and squeezed it. She wanted to run to the child and pick her up, but she dared not to. A look of revulsion crossed Mr. Derby's face as he stared at the perfect brown features of the infant. Isabel Derby cried out, "My baby," and reached for the child on the ground in front of her, but her husband held her firmly. Noah, impassive once more, showed no outward emotion, but tears slipped down his face. Mr. Derby, his voice full of self-control, spoke calmly and clearly to his wife. "I loved you," he said, almost plaintively. "You were so young and beautiful, like springtime all year long. I just knew that you would erase all the sorrows from my past." Mrs. Derby shuddered, with her head hung low. "But you chose to betray me," her husband said, venom returning to his voice. "You're not even worthy of my vomit," he inhaled. "But I shall not kill you," he continued in a low, eerily controlled voice. She looked at him in surprise. "Instead, I shall refuse to let you die." Polly was confused. She didn't understand what he meant, but soon it became terribly apparent. Mr. Derby pulled his wife over to where Noah stood, and then, with one hand, he cocked the musket and aimed it at Noah's broad chest. He spat at Noah, then he glanced at his wife. He made sure that she was watching, and then he fired. Noah's blood splattered them all as he fell to the ground, not far from his child. Polly screamed, Amari cried out, and Teeny fell to her knees, mumbling, "Oh, sweet Jesus." The noise of the gunshot startled the baby, who cried even louder from where she lay on the ground. Mrs. Derby, shrieking and twisting like a mad woman, fought to get free of her husband's grip. Mr. Derby suddenly released her in a heap on the ground as she calmly but swiftly reloaded the gun. Sobbing hysterically, Isabel Derby scrambled in the dirt toward her baby. She had almost reached the infant when another gunshot exploded in the darkness. The baby was suddenly silent. Okay, so Mr. Derby, if you didn't know he was evil by now, which I know that you do, he just shot a man and a baby in cold blood. A brand new, innocent, brand new baby. Only hours old, literally, not even one day, has shot them in cold blood without hesitation. The baby, of course, was retrieved by the devil number 2, Clay Derby. Something somewhat positive that we can see from this chapter, if you can think of anything at all, would be Polly's response to this all. Polly is equally upset and shocked, which is a good thing, because she is realizing that these people are not just dark-skinned folk from Africa, but they are people too. They are people just like her. They just have darker skin. They just have a really good tan. More melanin. She says that at one point when she's going to the road to stop the doctor, she has like a brief moment of when she came to the Derbyshire Farms and she realizes, wow, things have really changed. I cannot believe that I have become so entangled in the lives of these people, of these slaves, but like in a good way. She doesn't have to go to the road. She doesn't have to help hide the baby. She doesn't have to weep. She doesn't have to feel sorry for Mrs. Derby. She doesn't have to do any of those things. She does them because she wants to, because her emotions are taking over because she's starting to realize, hey, I don't need to be racist. Just because I was brought up by my parents to be racist doesn't mean I have to be. You can always change. And furthermore, Polly was racist for the first 15 years of her life, but she realizes, just because I made this mistake for that many years doesn't mean that I can't change. And, maybe in Polly's future, she'll advocate against it, against slavery. It's okay. Just because you made a mistake once doesn't mean that you can't grow from it and advocate against it in the future, which I think is really, really cool. But now we've got a really big mess, because if Mr. Derby is evil enough and angry enough that he is going to kill a baby, and then he says to his wife, I'm going to force you to watch, what will he do to the girls and to Teeny, because she's right there? What will he do to Sarah Jane, who helped hide the baby? What will he do to all the rest of the slaves who have gone missing? As Teeny said earlier, we don't know.